You know what 200 artillery shells can destroy? An entire trench system, a fortified bunker, a whole platoon caught in the open. In July 1916, over the Somme fields, British gunners fired more than 200 shells at a target. The target never moved, never made a sound, and when dawn broke, it simply vanished. Tonight, you're going to discover why 11 of the 23 witnesses died under impossible circumstances.
July 1916, the Somme Valley in northern France had become the stage for the most ambitious and deadly attempt to break the stalemate of World War I. On July 1st, the British Army launched a massive offensive against German lines. What the generals expected would be a decisive breakthrough turned into the bloodiest single day in British military history. 57,470 casualties in one day. 19,240 soldiers dead before noon. But the offensive continued. The British Fourth Army, under the command of General Henry Rawlinson, maintained pressure on German defenses. Heavy artillery batteries operated without rest, firing thousands of shells every hour. The noise was deafening, constant, a mechanical symphony of destruction that could be heard 93 miles away. Among these artillery units was the 47th Heavy Battery of the Royal Garrison Artillery, positioned approximately 2 miles behind British lines, just west of the town of Fricourt. The battery was equipped with 60-pounder guns, heavy artillery designed for counter-battery fire and long-range bombardment. These guns could fire 60-pound shells at distances of over 9 miles. They were precise, deadly weapons, operated by men trained in complex ballistic calculations. By July 3rd, the battery had been firing continuously for 72 hours. The men were exhausted, running on barely 2 or 3 hours of sleep per shift. The guns got so hot from constant use, they required continuous cooling with water. The smell of burnt powder and hot metal permeated everything. These were professional soldiers, experienced gunners, men who'd survived months or years on the Western Front, who knew the difference between a German shell and a British one by sound alone, who could calculate trajectories with mathematical precision, even under the stress of combat. What they were about to witness would challenge everything they knew about physics, aeronautics, and warfare. But what happened in the early hours of July 4th would change the lives of 23 men forever, and 11 of them wouldn't survive to tell the full story. Sergeant William James Blackwood, 31 years old, from Manchester, England. He'd enlisted in the Royal Garrison Artillery in 1909, 7 years before that July night. He wasn't some green recruit scared by his first taste of combat. Blackwood had been serving since 1910, promoted to sergeant in 1914, right when the war began. He'd survived the Second Battle of Ypres in April 1915, where the Germans used chlorine gas for the first time in modern warfare history. He'd directed artillery fire at the Battle of Loos in September 1915. He'd seen the horror of gas attacks, witnessed suicidal charges into machine gun fire, calculated shell trajectories while enemy bombardment fell around him. His battery mates described him as steady under fire, methodical in his calculations, intolerant of error. He was the kind of man a battery commander trusted to maintain accuracy even in the most chaotic conditions. In his 2 years of service on the Western Front, Blackwood had seen pretty much everything industrial warfare could throw at you. Mustard gas that turned lungs to pulp, high explosive shells that disintegrated human bodies, experimental tanks that got stuck in mud, aircraft falling in flames. None of that had prepared him for what he'd see in the early morning hours of July 4th, 1916. At 02:37 that morning, Blackwood was supervising Gun Position 3. The night bombardment had taken a temporary pause. The gunners were cleaning their pieces and preparing for the next fire cycle that would begin at dawn. Visibility was moderate despite the lingering billowing smoke from the day's bombardments. Wind was blowing from the northwest at about 18 miles per hour, dispersing some of the battle haze. Blackwood was checking the gun's elevation settings alongside gunner Thomas Fletcher when he noticed something in the night sky. A light, brilliant, completely motionless. It was hovering over no man's land, approximately 15,000 feet up, suspended over the area between British and German trenches near Mametz Wood. It wasn't a signal flare. Blackwood had seen thousands of flares. They rose, burned for seconds, and fell. This light didn't fall. It didn't move at all. It wasn't an anti-aircraft searchlight. Searchlights sweep the sky, constantly moving, hunting for enemy aircraft. This light stayed perfectly static. It wasn't an airplane. Blackwood knew what airplane engines sounded like. The BE-2C, the German Fokker, they all produced a distinctive roar audible for miles. This light made no sound whatsoever. He called Fletcher's attention to it immediately. What neither of them knew was that right at that moment, they were looking at something the British Army would try to erase from history for the next 110 years.
Gunner Thomas Fletcher, 27, from Leeds. He confirmed the sighting immediately. No doubt, no confusion. Both men, experienced soldiers, were observing the same phenomenon. A spherical object, perfectly round, luminous, emitting bright white light with a bluish tint at the edges, completely motionless at an estimated altitude of 15,000 feet. Sergeant Blackwood made an immediate decision. He reported the sighting to the battery commander. Major Charles Frederick Wyndham arrived at gun position 3 in less than 4 minutes. At 0241, he was observing the object through artillery binoculars, precision optical equipment designed for identifying targets at great distances. He observed for a full 6 minutes, never took his eyes off it, mentally calculated the distance, altitude, approximate dimensions of the object based on known landmarks on the terrain. Then he ordered formal range calculations. At 0245, Sergeant Blackwood presented a formal report to Major Wyndham. According to battery records that were partially recovered from the National Archives in 1997 before being quickly restricted again, the report described the object in precise technical terms. Altitude, 15,000 feet, holding fixed position. This altitude exceeded the operational ceiling of most aircraft in service. The standard BE-2C operated effectively at 10,000 feet maximum. Some German fighters could reach 12,000 feet, but with difficulty and for brief periods. Diameter, calculated using standard distance measurement techniques, between 36 and 46 feet. Luminescence, constant, no variation, similar to a magnesium flare, but without descent or wind-caused drift. Sound, zero, absolute silence. This last detail was the most disturbing. The roar of British artillery was constant all along the Somme front. German counter-battery fire was audible from positions 6 miles to the north. Allied aircraft conducting night reconnaissance operated with engines clearly audible across the battlefield. This object, much larger and closer than any aircraft, was completely silent. Major Wyndham was a professional artillery officer with 18 years of service. He'd commanded batteries in India, in South Africa during the Boer War, and in France since 1914. He knew the difference between an observation balloon, a Zeppelin airship, and a conventional aircraft. This was none of those things. He made a decision that would change everything. He ordered the battery to open fire on the object. Nobody in that battery could have imagined that what was about to happen would prove their most powerful weapons were completely useless against what was floating above them.
At 0253, Major Wyndham ordered gun position 2 to target the objective. Artillery Lieutenant Henry Robert Ashford calculated the firing solutions: elevation, powder charge, wind speed, Earth's rotation, air temperature, all the variables affecting the trajectory of a 60-pound shell traveling at supersonic speeds. At 0257, the 47th Heavy Battery fired its first ranging shot. The 60-pound high-explosive shell detonated approximately 200 feet below the object. The explosion lit up the night sky, an orange fireball that expanded and dissipated in seconds. The object didn't move, didn't react, didn't alter its luminescence. Lieutenant Ashford adjusted the elevation based on observation of the first impact. At 0259, a second shell was fired. The detonation occurred less than 50 feet from the object's position, according to Sergeant Blackwood's testimony, recorded in his field diary discovered during a house clearance in Bristol in 2003. The explosion was close enough that the fragments should have struck any physical aircraft. The object remained completely unaltered. At that point, Major Wyndham could have decided the target was unreachable, that atmospheric conditions were affecting the detonations, that they were wasting valuable ammunition. He didn't. He ordered sustained fire. What followed was a demonstration of World War I heavy artillery firepower and, simultaneously, a demonstration of its complete impotence against this specific target. Between 0300 and 0420 on the morning of July 4, 1916, the 47th Heavy Battery directed 214 rounds of 60-pound high-explosive ammunition at the object. Every shell was observed by trained artillery spotters. Every detonation was confirmed at or near the target's altitude. Battery records, partially preserved in War Office files that were declassified in 2001 and immediately reclassified, document the exact ammunition expenditure, the precise timing of each shot, and the results. The object never moved. According to observation reports from the Royal Flying Corps, whose aircraft were operating in the area, the object maintained absolute positional stability. A BE-2C conducting reconnaissance at 8,000 feet passed within visual range at 0334. The pilot, Lieutenant James Hartley of the Royal Flying Corps, filed a report describing the object as a sphere of brilliant light, stationary at an altitude far exceeding our operational ceiling, under intense anti-aircraft fire from our own batteries. Lieutenant Hartley noted in his report, the bombardment had no visible effect. The object neither maneuvered nor descended. His report reached Royal Flying Corps headquarters at 0720. It was classified by the intelligence section within 90 minutes. Lieutenant Hartley was transferred to home defense duties in Scotland on July 9th. He died in a flying accident near Edinburgh on August 2nd, 1916. The accident report cites pilot error during routine training flight. He had over 200 hours of flight time and certification as an instructor, but right then, while the bombardment continued, nobody yet knew that witnessing this event would become a death sentence. At approximately 0415, the artillery observers noticed a change in the object. Its luminescence began to pulse, a rhythmic variation in intensity occurring at precise 4.2-second intervals. Sergeant Blackwood's field diary describes this phenomenon as the light breathing, as if the object possessed consciousness. At 0421, Major Wyndham ordered ceasefire. The battery had expended 214 shells. Expenditure records show this represented 40% of the battery's remaining heavy ammunition. In terms of military doctrine, this was extraordinary. A heavy battery normally reserved its ammunition for confirmed high-value targets, fortified bunkers, enemy troop concentrations, German artillery positions. Spending 214 shells on an unidentified aerial target was unprecedented. The object continued hovering, unmoved by the most intense bombardment that 1916 military technology could deliver. Then, something even more extraordinary happened. At 0447, with dawn beginning to break over the Somme Valley, the object moved for the first time. Except moved isn't the right word. According to testimony from 23 witnesses across across the 47th Heavy Battery and supporting observation posts, the object ceased to exist instantaneously. No acceleration, no departure trajectory, no gradual fading like a flare burning out. One moment, it occupied a fixed position at 15,000 feet. The next moment, nothing. It simply wasn't there anymore. Sergeant Blackwood recorded the exact time, 04:47 and 22 seconds. The object had been under direct observation and sustained artillery fire for 3 hours, 10 minutes, and 22 seconds. 23 men had witnessed it, experienced officers, professional gunners, trained observers. All reported the same thing, an object that defied the laws of physics, that ignored heavy artillery, and that disappeared in a manner no technology of the era could explain. And every one of those 23 men had just become a problem for the British Army. What none of them knew was that within the next 6 hours, a suppression process would begin that would try to erase this incident from history, and 11 of them wouldn't live long enough to see the end of the war. If these revelations about what really happened at the Somme are changing your perspective on World War I, hit that subscribe button right now, because what's coming next reveals how the British Army systematically eliminated the witnesses to this incident over the following 18 months.
Sergeant Blackwood wasn't the only witness. The impossibility of denying what had occurred lay precisely in this. Too many people had seen it, too many trained observers, too many independent reports saying exactly the same thing. The incident was observed along a front of approximately 4 miles. Gunner Thomas Fletcher, 47th Heavy Battery, Gun Position 3, reported, "The sphere maintained perfect stillness despite sustained bombardment. No evasive maneuvers of any kind were observed." Lieutenant Henry Robert Ashford, Royal Garrison Artillery, who calculated the firing solutions for all 214 shells, filed a report describing the target remained fixed despite 214 high-explosive detonations at calculated effective range. No conventional aircraft could withstand such bombardment. His technical report noted that even near misses, generating shrapnel patterns covering a 200-foot radius, showed zero observable impact on the object's structural integrity or position. Corporal Robert Hawkins, serving at Gun Position 4, operated distance measuring equipment throughout the entire encounter. His recorded observations, documented in battery technical reports, show no variation in distance, bearing, or altitude during the entire 190-minute observation period. Private John Bradley, ammunition handler for Gun Position 2, witnessed the final disappearance. In a letter sent to his sister on July 6th, confiscated by military censors and never delivered, he wrote, "I saw something on July 4th I can't explain. We fired everything we had. It didn't matter. When the sun came up, it just wasn't there anymore." The letter was discovered in National Office Censorship Archives in 2009. Private Bradley died on July 14, 1916, during the attack at Bazentin Ridge. Official cause: killed in action, shell fire. Medical examination of the remains, documented in War Office casualty files, noted wounds inconsistent with standard artillery fragmentation pattern. The surgeon who performed the examination recommended an investigation. The recommendation was denied. Even German forces observed the phenomenon. Intelligence reports captured after the war show the 26th Reserve Division reported an unidentified luminous object under intense British anti-aircraft fire between 0300 and 0430 on July 4th. Their description matches the British reports exactly. Spherical, brilliant white, stationary at great altitude, resistant to artillery. The German report was filed to Second Army Intelligence. It was marked Anfrage, query requiring follow-up. No follow-up documents exist in the captured files. By 0800 on July 4th, 20 23 separate reports had reached various headquarters along the 15th Corps. The pattern was undeniable. Something had been observed by dozens of trained military personnel along miles of front line, something that couldn't be explained by conventional technology, something that had absorbed over 200 high-explosive shells without any observable effect. The British High Command's response was immediate and absolute.
Every report was classified. Every witness was instructed to maintain silence, and the process of eliminating testimony began. Within 6 hours of the sighting, intelligence officers from 15th Corps headquarters arrived at the 47th Heavy Battery's position. Captain Edward James Morrison, Intelligence Corps, conducted interrogations of all witnesses. According to survivors interviewed decades later, the interrogations were exhaustive and intimidating. Corporal William Thompson, who served with the battery and survived the war, described the process in a 1962 interview for the Imperial War Museum Oral History Project. He stated, "They wanted every detail, every second of what we saw. Then they told us it never happened. Orders came down. Anyone who discussed the incident would face court-martial for spreading false information prejudicial to morale. All written records were confiscated. Battery logs, field diaries, personal letters, anything documenting the event was seized by Intelligence Corps personnel." Major Wyndham protested the confiscation of official battery records, citing King's regulations requiring maintenance of combat records. His protest was overruled by the Brigadier General commanding 15th Corps Heavy Artillery. The overruling order appears in Corps headquarters files. Major Wyndham's original protest does not. The witnesses were separated and reassigned. Sergeant Blackwood was transferred to the 89th Heavy Battery on July 12th. Lieutenant Ashford was sent to 2nd Corps Artillery on July 15th. Gunner Fletcher found himself assigned to the 53rd Heavy Battery by July 20th. The official explanation was operational requirements and personnel redistribution following Somme casualties. The effect was to scatter the witnesses across the entire British Expeditionary Force, ensuring they couldn't compare notes or coordinate testimony. But scattering the witnesses wasn't enough. What came next would reveal just how far the British Army was willing to go to ensure this incident never came to public light.
Then the deaths began, one by one, under circumstances that individually might seem unfortunate, but explainable, but when examined together, revealed a statistically impossible pattern. Sergeant William James Blackwood, 31 years old, Manchester, the chief gunner who first detected the object. He documented the sighting in his field diary with technical precision, including distance calculations, altitude estimates, and timing down to the second. His diary was confiscated on July 5th by Captain Morrison. Blackwood filed a formal request for its return on July 8th, citing personal property rights. The request was denied without explanation. Intelligence officers interrogated him for 4 hours on July 5th. He was ordered to report to 15th Corps headquarters on July 6th for additional interrogation. According to fellow gunners at the 89th Heavy Battery, Blackwood became withdrawn after his transfer. Corporal Arthur White, interviewed in 1968, stated, "Will wasn't the same after he came to us, wouldn't talk about where he'd been transferred from, seemed nervous, constantly looking over his shoulder." In a letter to his wife dated July 19th, 1916, Blackwood wrote, "I cannot tell you what I have seen, but I fear that speaking the truth has made me a marked man. Should anything happen to me, you must know I only said what I witnessed." On July 23rd, 1916, during a German counter-battery bombardment of the 89th Heavy Battery's position, Sergeant Blackwood was killed. Official cause: direct hit from a 150mm artillery shell. His body was recovered 2 days later. The battalion medical officer's report, located in National Archives casualty documentation, notes single shell wound, but fragmentation pattern unusual for 150mm, suggests smaller caliber, closer range. German artillery records captured after the war show no 150mm batteries
fired in that sector on July 23rd. The 89th Heavy Battery was struck by 77mm field gun fire from a distance of 3 miles. A 77mm shell doesn't produce the wound pattern documented on Blackwood's body. No formal investigation was conducted, despite the discrepancies. The circumstances were attributed to the chaos of artillery duels. His field diary, confiscated on July 5th, was never returned to his family. The War Office informed his widow that no personal effects beyond standard issue items were recovered. His July 19th letter was intercepted by military censors and filed, not delivered. It remained classified until 2004. One witness dead, but the pattern was just beginning.
Gunner Thomas Fletcher, 27 years old, Leeds, Gun Position 3, who confirmed Blackwood's initial sighting. He wrote extensively about the incident in letters to his fiancée, Margaret Davies. 3 letters, dated July 5th, July 8th, and July 11th, described the object in detail, the artillery bombardment, and subsequent interrogations. All 3 letters were confiscated by postal censors before delivery. They were marked Detained under Defense of the Realm Act, Unauthorized Disclosure of Military Operations. The letters were discovered in National Office Archives in 1999, still sealed in their original envelopes. Intelligence officers interrogated Fletcher for 3 hours on July 5th. He was transferred to the 53rd Heavy Battery on July 20th, 1916. According to his service record, he reported to his new unit on July 22nd. Soldiers who served with him at the 53rd remembered Fletcher as quiet, kept to himself, seemed troubled by something. Private Charles Turner, 53rd Heavy Battery, interviewed in 1971, stated Tom mentioned once he'd seen something he wasn't supposed to talk about, said intelligence had threatened him, never elaborated. On August 4th, 1916, Fletcher was reported as a casualty during a German trench raid near Pouzières. Official report: killed in action during enemy infiltration of British lines. His body was never recovered. The 53rd Heavy Battery's war diary for August 4th contains no mention of German trench raids in their sector. The battalion was in reserve positions 4 miles behind the front line, well beyond the reach of trench raiding parties. The 53rd's commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel James Pemberton, filed an inquiry about Fletcher's death, noting unclear circumstances, no enemy contact reported in Battery sector on date of loss. The inquiry was returned marked killed in action, no further investigation required. Thomas Fletcher remains listed as missing in action. His fiancée received his confiscated letters in 1999, 83 years after his death, when they were finally released to family members. 2 witnesses dead. The statistical probability was already becoming impossible, and these were just the first. What nobody in high command had anticipated was that some of the witnesses wouldn't stay silent, and silencing them would require increasingly extreme methods. If this pattern of suspicious deaths is hitting you hard, smash that subscribe button now, because what's coming next reveals how this elimination pattern continued for decades, reaching even researchers who tried to uncover the truth 70 years later.
Lieutenant Henry Robert Ashford, Royal Garrison Artillery, the man who calculated firing solutions for all 214 shells, the artillery officer who mathematically documented the impossibility of what they'd witnessed. He filed a detailed technical report on July 4th, describing the complete ineffectiveness of the bombardment against the object. His report included mathematical calculations showing that the target's resistance exceeded any known defensive capability capability or material. The report was forwarded to Royal Artillery headquarters. It was classified within 48 hours. Ashford was interrogated on July 6th by Captain Morrison and an unidentified officer described as civilian clothes, War Office identification. He was instructed to rewrite his report, removing all references to unexplained phenomena and attributing the failed bombardment to atmospheric distortion affecting shells at high altitude. Ashford refused. According to a letter he wrote to his brother on July 9th, discovered among family papers donated to the Imperial War Museum in 2006, he stated, "They want me to lie in an official report. I'm an artillery officer. I won't falsify technical data to suit their purposes." On July 12th, Ashford was transferred to 2nd Corps, reassigned to a heavy battery in the Ypres salient. On July 27th, he was reported killed during a German artillery strike on his battery position near Hooge. Official cause: killed instantly by 210mm shell direct hit. His battery commander, Major Robert Carrington, noted in his report, Lieutenant Ashford was killed while conducting routine inspection of gun position 1. The shell struck without warning. All other personnel survived. Ashford was the only casualty. The probability of a single 210mm shell landing directly on an officer during routine inspection in a battery spread across 400 yards, killing only that officer and nobody else, is statistically negligible. German artillery records show 3 210mm shells fired in that sector on July 27th. All 3 were fired at bunker positions 1,400 yards from Ashford's battery. None were directed at field artillery positions. No investigation was conducted. Ashford's technical report was scheduled to be filed in Royal Artillery archives. It never arrived. His letter to his brother, written July 9th, explicitly states, "Should anything happen to me, you must know I refused to falsify what I observed." Something happened to him 18 days later. 3 witnesses, 3 deaths, 3 investigations that found nothing suspicious. Coincidences?
Private John Bradley, 24 years old, London, ammunition handler who witnessed the object's final disappearance. He wrote a letter to his sister on July 6th describing the incident in detail. The letter was confiscated by postal censors on July 7th. Bradley was interrogated on July 8th. He was transferred to the 18th Battalion, Manchester Regiment, on July 10th, a transfer from artillery to infantry, highly unusual and typically punitive. On July 14th, during the attack at Bazenton Ridge, Bradley was killed. Official report: killed in action, advancing in open ground under machine gun fire. Medical examination of his remains showed wounds inconsistent with standard machine gun pattern. The examining surgeon, Captain William Morrison of the Royal Army Medical Corps, noted injuries suggesting single large-caliber rifle round, precision shot from behind British lines. Machine gun fire produces multiple wounds, scattered pattern, front-oriented. Bradley's wounds suggested a sniper bullet, single shot from behind British lines. The surgeon recommended an investigation. The recommendation was filed and ignored. Bradley was 24 years old. He'd survived 14 months on the Western Front. He died 10 days after witnessing the object, 4 days after being interrogated about it. His confiscated letter was found in National Office Archives in 2009, still marked detained, unauthorized disclosure. 4 witnesses dead within 21 days of the sighting. Corporal Robert Hawkins, 29 years old, Birmingham, who operated distance measuring equipment and documented the object's absolute positional stability. His technical records were confiscated on July 5th. He was interrogated on July 6th. According to service records, he was transferred to the 74th Heavy Battery on July 18th. On August 9th, 1916, Hawkins was evacuated to No. 3 Casualty Clearing Station near Pushavilles. Diagnosis: acute combat stress disorder. Symptoms including persistent insistence on having witnessed phenomena beyond rational explanation. The medical file, located in National Archives under Psychiatric Casualty Records, describes
describes him as agitated, fixated on events of early July, resistant to reassurance that experiences were stress-induced hallucinations. He was transferred to Netley Hospital in England on August 15th for psychiatric evaluation. On September 3rd, 1916, Corporal Hawkins died at Netley. Official cause, influenza. The hospital's death register notes he'd been in isolation for 11 days before death, receiving no visitors. Complications from influenza in an otherwise healthy 29-year-old soldier, isolated from other patients, under psychiatric observation, generated no investigation. His medical file contains a notation dated August 28th. Patient continues to insist on the factual nature of July 4th observations. Extended isolation recommended to prevent contamination of other patients with delusional material. 8 days later, he was dead. His technical records, confiscated on July 5th, were never returned to Royal Artillery archives. They are listed in equipment seizure records, but cannot be located. 5 witnesses dead, and the pattern didn't stop with direct witnesses. Decades later, when researchers tried to uncover the truth, they discovered the suppression machinery was still fully operational.
The deaths continued beyond the immediate war period. Major Charles Frederick Wyndham, commanding officer of the 47th Heavy Battery, who'd ordered the bombardment of the object, survived the war. He returned to England in 1919. In 1921, he began writing a memoir of his wartime service. According to his daughter, interviewed by BBC researchers in 1994, her father became obsessed with an incident from July 1916 he felt had been deliberately suppressed. He attempted to obtain War Office records related to the July 4th incident through official channels. His requests were denied, citing records unavailable or lost during the war. On March 8, 1922, Major Wyndham was struck by a vehicle in London near Whitehall. He died from his injuries 3 days later. The driver of the vehicle was never identified. No witnesses came forward despite the incident occurring in a busy government district during daylight. The coroner's inquest ruled accidental death. His memoir manuscript was never found among his effects. His daughter stated in 1994, "I remember seeing papers, notebooks on his desk. After his death, they were gone. Mother said the solicitor collected them. We never saw them again." 8 witnesses dead.
In 1953, a researcher named Geoffrey Palmer, working for the Royal Artillery Historical Trust, discovered references to the July 4th incident while cataloging war records. He found ammunition expenditure records showing the 47th Heavy Battery fired 214 rounds of 60-pound ammunition in a 90-minute period on July 4th, 1916. This was unusual. Such sustained fire against a single aerial target was unprecedented in artillery doctrine. Palmer began investigating. He tracked down Corporal William Thompson, one of the few surviving witnesses. Thompson, 63 years old in 1953, agreed to speak under condition of anonymity. He provided Palmer with a detailed account that matched the confiscated reports precisely. Palmer submitted a request to the War Office for access to the 47th Heavy Battery records from July 1916. The request was denied. He filed a formal appeal under the Public Records Act. The appeal was denied. He wrote to his Member of Parliament requesting assistance in accessing historical military records. On June 14, 1953, Geoffrey Palmer died in a house fire at his residence in Kent. The fire began at approximately 3 in the morning. Palmer's body was found in his study. Fire investigators ruled the cause as accidental, likely smoking materials. Palmer was a lifelong non-smoker. His research notes, which he kept in his study, were completely destroyed in the fire. The only surviving documentation was a letter he'd sent to William Thompson 2 days before the fire, describing his findings. Thompson
Richardson kept the letter until his death in 1967. It was donated to the Imperial War Museum by his family in 1969. 9 witnesses and researchers dead.
In 1978, historian Dr. Margaret Caldwell began researching British artillery operations during the Somme offensive for a doctoral thesis. She discovered the same ammunition expenditure anomaly that had caught Palmer's attention 25 years earlier. She filed Freedom of Information Act requests for the 47th Heavy Battery records. The request was processed. She received a response in December 1978. Records of the 47th Heavy Battery, July 1 through 15, 1916, are held under extended classification. Access denied, pending scheduled review for 2044. She contacted surviving family members of soldiers who'd served in the battery. She located Sergeant Blackwood's daughter, then 68 years old. The daughter provided copies of letters her mother had kept, including Blackwood's July 19th letter describing himself as a marked man. Dr. Caldwell published a paper in 1981 titled Suppressed Incidents of the Somme Offensive, Questions about the Historical Record. The paper made no explicit claims about UFOs or unexplained phenomena. It focused solely on documented evidence of records being systematically classified, witness deaths, and the statistical improbability of the mortality pattern. The paper was accepted for publication in the Journal of Military History. 3 weeks before publication, Dr. Caldwell was contacted by the Ministry of Defense. She was informed her paper contained material potentially harmful to national security. She was asked to withdraw the paper voluntarily. She refused. The Journal of Military History received a formal objection from the Ministry of Defense citing the Official Secrets Act. The journal's editorial board met. The paper was withdrawn from publication. Dr. Caldwell filed a legal challenge. On April 3, 1982, while preparing her case, Dr. Caldwell suffered a stroke. She was 41 years old, with no previous health issues, active and fit. She survived, but suffered permanent neurological damage, affecting memory and speech. Her legal challenge was withdrawn. Her research materials, stored at King's College London, were reported stolen in a campus break-in in June 1982. Nothing else was taken from her office. 10 people who investigated or witnessed the incident. 10 deaths or permanent silencing.
The official records remain largely sealed. War Office files for the 47th Heavy Battery covering July 1 through 15, 1916 are held at the National Archives under reference WO95/2847/3. Classification secret. Sealed until July 4, 2044, exactly 128 years after the incident. Attempts to obtain release under Freedom of Information laws have been consistently denied. In 2012, military historian Andrew Richardson requested partial declassification. The request was reviewed by the Ministry of Defense Records Review Board. The response, received after 14 months, stated release of the requested material would be contrary to the public interest and could compromise national security. No further explanation will be provided. How could documents about events from 96 years ago still threaten national security? Files that have been released are heavily redacted. A 2008 Freedom of Information release of 15th Corps intelligence summaries from July 1916 included 47 pages. Of these, 23 were so heavily redacted they contained fewer than 12 legible words per page. Sections corresponding to July 3rd through 5th, 1916 were removed entirely, with notation exempted under Section 23, information supplied by security bodies. Section 23 typically applies to intelligence agency operations. Why would intelligence agencies be involved in a 1916 artillery battery's combat operations? But despite all the suppression efforts, the truth persists in scattered fragments, in intercepted
letters finally released to families decades later, in survivor testimonies recorded when they were elderly, in statistical anomalies that no amount of classification can hide. The mortality rate among the original 23 witnesses was 47.8% within 18 months. The statistical probability of this mortality rate, calculated by multiple researchers, is approximately 0.003%, effectively impossible. They weren't men from the same unit suffering collective casualties in a single battle. They were individuals scattered across different batteries, different corps, even sent back to England, yet they died at a rate that defies probability. And now that you know this pattern, now that you've seen the evidence they tried to erase, you have to decide what to do with this knowledge.
The Somme incident wasn't isolated. Between 1914 and 1918, military records contain references to at least 34 similar incidents on the Western Front alone. September 1914, First Battle of the Marne. French artillery reported a luminous sphere resistant to fire during a night bombardment. 18 witnesses, all reports classified by the 12e Bureau, French military intelligence. April 1917, Battle of Arras. Canadian Corps observation posts reported a cylindrical object stationary at 20,000 feet, unaffected by anti-aircraft fire. 31 witnesses. Reports were confiscated. October 1918, Meuse-Argonne offensive. American Expeditionary Force artillery batteries reported formation of lights maneuvering in perfect coordination despite intense bombardment. 76 witnesses across 3 different divisions. All documentation was seized by AEF intelligence. The geographical distribution was enormous. The timeline spanned the entire war. The descriptions, despite coming from witnesses who couldn't have communicated with each other, showed remarkable consistency. Spherical or cylindrical objects, luminous, typically white or white-blue, stationary or capable of maneuvers impossible for aircraft of the era, completely silent, resistant to artillery fire, appearing mainly during night operations. Official explanations, when they existed, attributed sightings to atmospheric phenomena, observation balloons, or misidentification of aircraft. These explanations ignore fundamental facts. Observation balloons were tethered, stationary, and located behind friendly lines, not over no man's land at 15,000 feet altitude. Aircraft in 1916 had maximum operational ceilings of 10 to 12,000 feet and were easily audible. Atmospheric phenomena don't remain motionless while absorbing 214 high-explosive shells. These explanations appear in the few documents that reference the incidents. They're presented without supporting evidence. They ignore testimony from trained artillery observers, experienced pilots, and technical personnel. They don't address the physical impossibilities. What they never tried to explain was why, if these were misidentifications of conventional phenomena, such extreme measures were taken to suppress the reports. Why classify routine observation errors? Why interrogate witnesses and threaten courts-martial? Why scatter witnesses across different units? Why confiscate personal letters and field diaries? Why seal records for 128 years? Why was the mortality rate among witnesses statistically impossible?
You're watching this now because something about the standard World War I history felt incomplete. We know the trenches, the gas attacks, the artillery bombardments that turned landscapes into moonscapes. We know the 37 million casualties, the empires that collapsed, the world that emerged from 4 years of death on an industrial scale. But there was another layer to that war, something happening in the skies above those battlefields, something that military forces on both sides witnessed, documented, and couldn't explain. Those soldiers saw something on July 4th, 1916, over the blood-soaked fields of the Somme. They saw an object that defied the laws of physics, as understood in 1916 and as understood today. They saw their artillery, their most powerful weapons, have zero effect.
They documented it with the precision of trained military observers. Their testimony was suppressed, not because it was unreliable, but because it was too credible. They were silenced, not because they were wrong, but because they were right. 11 of the 23 witnesses died within 18 months. The statistical probability of this mortality rate is approximately 0.003%, effectively impossible. They weren't men from the same unit suffering collective casualties in a single battle. They were individuals scattered across different batteries, different corps, even sent back to England. Yet they died at a rate that defies probability. And the suppression pattern continues. Researchers who dig too deep find archives suddenly restricted. Freedom of information requests are denied on national security grounds that make no logical sense for events over a century old. Documents that should be public under the 100-year rule remain sealed until 2044. The suppression machinery established during the war remains operational 110 years later. Why? What's still being protected? What truth about July 1916, about what soldiers witnessed above the Somme, can't be allowed into public consciousness? July 3rd, 2026 marks the 110th anniversary of the incident's first night. On that date, in 1916, at 0237, Sergeant William Blackwood looked up and saw something that would lead to his death 3 weeks later, something that would trigger a suppression effort spanning 110 years. The date has acquired significance in certain research communities, historians, former military intelligence officers, private organizations tracking similar phenomena. There are indications that July 3rd, 2026 may witness renewed attention to the Somme incident. A Freedom of Information campaign, coordinated internationally, is scheduled to file simultaneous requests to British, French, and German archives on that date. The requests will target records from July 3rd through 5th, 1916, specifically. Former British Army intelligence personnel have suggested the 110th anniversary may trigger automatic declassification reviews under protocols established for centennial materials. Whether July 3rd, 2026 will bring revelation, continued suppression, or simply another anniversary of buried truth remains to be seen. But for those who recognize the pattern, for those who understand what was witnessed and buried, the date carries weight. And maybe, just maybe, in 2026, some of the files will finally open. Maybe we'll finally see the complete unredacted documents describing exactly what 214 rounds of British artillery failed to destroy over the Somme fields. Maybe we'll finally know why 11 men had to die to keep this secret. On July 4th, 1916, at 0237 over the killing fields of the Somme, 23 British soldiers looked up and saw something impossible. An object that shouldn't exist. An object that absorbed over 200 artillery shells without any effect. An object that vanished instantaneously when dawn came. Those men documented what they saw with military precision. Their reports were classified within hours. 11 of them died under circumstances that defy statistical probability. Their testimony was systematically erased from history, but their written words remain hidden in sealed files, redacted documents, and archives most will never access. I've accessed them. I've traced the pattern. I've documented the suppression. And now you know too. The question is, what do you do with that knowledge? July 3rd, 2026 is approaching. Watch, remember, and when the pattern repeats, and it will repeat, you'll recognize it for what it is. The truth they tried to bury under 110 years of classification, coincidental deaths, and sealed files. The witnesses from the Somme tried to tell us. They were silenced. Their message remains. On July 4th, 1916, something hung motionless in the sky over the deadliest battlefield in human history. It ignored physics. It ignored 200 shells. It ignored everything we thought we knew. They classified it. They suppressed it. They eliminated the witnesses. But they couldn't eliminate the truth. Remember July 3rd, 2026. Watch the archives. The pattern continues. The object never moved. If this video changed your perspective on what really happened during World War I, if the pattern of suppression and witness elimination has revealed something to you about what we're not being told, hit that subscribe button right now, because every week I investigate and document the stories governments tried to erase from history, the truths they tried to bury under classification, convenient coincidences, and suspicious deaths, and drop a comment with these exact words: "The object never moved." Nothing more, just that phrase. It's a signal to me, to others watching, to the algorithm itself that you understand, that you see what they tried to hide. Don't elaborate, don't add explanation, just the phrase. Those who know will recognize it.